Chapter 21. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 21. An Unexpected Guest, TL. Osaka, PR. Ash. After Letho had gone upstairs with the lady, Roy stopped cheating as much. He knew he should lay low, so he lost a couple matches on purpose after winning a few. His opponent didn't lose too much, and people didn't think he won too much either. In reality though, he won quite some crowns. 20 in an hour, but nobody realized he was cheating. On the other hand, Roy noticed his opponent, a man in his 30s, cheat right under his nose. Gee, and I thought I was shameless enough. He could see how the man was cheating clearly, thanks to his 7 points in perception. It's so dumb it's laughable. He didn't make a fuss right away though. He was only a weak child after Letho had gone upstairs. If he were to anger the locals, he'd have to disturb Letho's fun time. You won a lot, boy. Why don't you treat us to a drink? The pasty, bearded man thought Roy was a gullible boy who couldn't see through his cheating. He quickly took away 10 crowns from Roy, much to the boy's surprise. Roy watched on, dumbfounded, and the man scoffed at him. Lucky, the bearded man thought. This is one easy prey. The kid's a coward. Going to be a good day today. Once again, he tried to take from Roy, but this time, it was his deck, the Skellige deck everyone wanted. Everyone looked on in curiosity, anger, fear, and delight, but none stood up for Roy. Poor boy. Sparrow Triad's out for him. He shouldn't have stayed here alone. Should ask for the Witcher's help now. Then, Roy slammed something onto the table. All anyone saw was a flash and a blur, and next thing they knew, a dagger caked in dried blood had lodged itself into the Gwent deck, right between the bearded man's fingers. If he'd gotten any closer to the deck, his hand would have been the thing that was stabbed. God damn it. The man pulled back his hand as fast as possible, his pasty face turning deathly pale in shock. Where did this dagger come from? I didn't notice it. And then he realized he'd embarrassed himself. He was an adult man, but a scrawny boy had managed to scare him. Do you know who I am, you little bastard? He flew into a rage. You're crossing the Sparrow Triad now, boy. Your days are numbered. Roy ignored the threat. He touched the crowns on the board with his left hand, and it disappeared without a trace. Then, he pulled his dagger out of the cards and blew on it gently. He'd changed after killing the bandits outside Aldersburg. Roy had killed animals, humans, and even monsters. The man before him was inexplicably funny despite his angry looks and threatening words. Oh, sorry. Roy smiled mirthlessly. I'd come across wild dogs, drowners, and ghouls the entire time I followed the Witcher around. Gotten used to having a weapon with me just in case. Well, I have to cut the heads off those monsters, or else. Roy squinted at the man, his face contorted with an eerie cruelty far beyond his age. They're going to kill me. The bearded man's heart sank, and he rubbed his bloodshot eyes. For an instant, he saw a bunch of crimson tentacles coming for him, and the boy was the source of them, but when he looked at Roy again, the tentacles were nowhere to be found. Even so, he felt a chill creeping up on him. This kid's weird. Better not fight him for now. Fine. You got guts, boy. You can live for a while longer, but only because I'm not armed today. You'd better watch out the next time you're on the streets. The Sparrow Triad has its eyes on you, he spat, and he backed off swiftly. When he was near the inn's door, he felt something cold brushing across his head. The man reflexively touched the spot, and he met nothing but skin, his hair was gone. The man gasped and turned around, only to see the dagger that had almost claimed his fingers embedding itself into the wall, its handle still quivering. You can leave after you give me back my 16 crowns, Roy said coldly. After the bearded man left the crowns behind and escaped in fear, everyone had lost their gusto for Gwent, fearing the revenge of the Sparrow Triad. A moment later, they scurried away in every direction. Roy rubbed his numb arms and retrieved the dagger. That took all I had. It almost flew out of control. That was close. I almost shot him in the head. That would have caused trouble. Roy finally felt the side effects of the unbalanced development of his body. If his dexterity was higher, he would have had better coordination, and the dagger throw wouldn't have taken as much of a toll as it did. When the innkeeper noticed Roy had his head down, he thought the boy was scared. "You'd better leave as soon as possible, my friend. You can't take on a group of them no matter how good you are in combat." "Not to worry," a rough, deep voice said, and Roy heard heavy footsteps coming from behind. "Allow me to introduce myself." A dwarf in a beret and fitted cape came up to Roy. The dwarf's shirt extended to his knees, and he was wearing a pair of pointed shoes paired with mid-calf socks. He was a bona fide dwarf. Roy's eyes widened in surprise. It was the first time he'd seen a non-human species after crossing over to the Witcher world. Or, to be more precise, an ancient species. The dwarf was barely 5 feet, and he was shorter than Roy, but he was tall compared to the average dwarf. "I am Seville Hoger, a wine merchant living in Aldersburg." "Hello, Mr. Seville. I'm Roy." "Let me guess," Roy steepled his fingers under his chin. "You're not here for me." Seville's belly jiggled. "Yes." He had a gruff, hard voice, as if he were pushing it down. "I received news of a Witcher's arrival in Aldersburg, and I'm here for him." "May I ask what school he's from?" "Of course, I'll chase off that little sparrow for you no matter what." "He's not from Cat School." "Don't worry. Man, Cat School really knows how to antagonize everyone. I'll take care of that little sparrow for you as a token of my friendship." "Grow, put the guest's bill on my tab," he told the innkeeper before leaving without hesitation. As Roy saw him off, the boy's eyes turned starry for a moment. "Whoa, that dwarf's 70. Not obvious at all. So dwarves do have long lives, just like the legends told me. Nothing spectacular about his stats though." However, Roy noticed 3 interesting abilities of his. Resilience, passive. Dwarves live long lives and possess powerful life forces. An adult dwarf has 20 more HP than humans. Strong body, passive. Dwarves are known for their proficiency with 2-handed weapons and their great stamina. An adult dwarf has 1 more point in strength and constitution than humans do. Stout, passive. Their stout, fat bodies make them move slower than normal humans. Their looks are undesirable by every other race. Some even despise dwarves for their looks. Their dexterity and charisma are deducted by 1 point. Roy thought those skills could be called talents. And he wondered. If dwarves have talents, why don't humans? No, we do have talents. Or else strong, long-living races like dwarves and elves wouldn't be backed into a corner by humans. Then the innkeeper broke his train of thought. "Lucky break, my friend. Mr. Seville came to check the accounts today. Since he's going to intervene, there's nothing to worry about now. The Sparrow Triad isn't your problem anymore. I thought he was just a wine merchant. Does the criminal underworld fear him?" Roy asked curiously. "The wine industry is monopolized by the dwarves here since they are from an ancient race famous for their wine brewing and blacksmithing. As the nephew of Mahakam's elder dwarf, Brovar Hoger, Mr. Seville is responsible for the wine business in Aldersburg. The Sparrow Triad have to respect him if they want to survive in the city." "What's his trouble then?" Mr. Seville, Grow sighed. "He's been haunted by a nightmare for months now. He thinks phantoms are the culprits." Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. https://discord.gg/reaperscans. Chapter 22. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 22. Investigation and Conjecture, TL. Osaka, PR. Roy woke up the next morning feeling refreshed after his meditation session. After replacing sleep with meditation, Roy only had to rest for 5 hours a day, and he'd wake up fully recharged. He couldn't believe he could do that, for he used to be a weak insomniac in his past life. Even though his new body was younger and weaker, it wasn't a bad one. In fact, it was better than his old one. Letho woke up earlier than he did. He was having wine and pie on the first floor, still looking inscrutable. If Roy hadn't known better, he wouldn't have thought Letho had a night of fun. Aren't you sleeping in? Relaxing is relaxing. A witcher must not deprive himself of discipline. As they chatted, Roy was just about to bring up the dwarf's request when Seville showed up. Seville's dark circles had worsened, and he looked exhausted. Even so, he kept himself awake and talked about his troubles to them. Witchers didn't mind more requests, so Letho listened to him. The nightmares started 3 months ago. They keep haunting me from midnight to dawn. They're like demons who won't let me rest. I can't really sleep. Sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night, and after a while, my health gets affected. Can you imagine that? I used to be the squirrel of Mahakam, the dwarf who can go without sleep for 3 days straight. But now, I doze off if I don't concentrate. I don't feel like a strong dwarf anymore. I'm more like the gnomes of Tyr Tochair. I scoured through Aldersburg, asked every doctor, but none of them knew what was wrong with me. I searched my home, but nothing weird came up, but I have a feeling something evil is in my house. It's cursing me, corrupting me, depriving me of peace. Nobody can help me, so please lend me a hand. Letho, the dwarf requested sincerely, the discrimination against witchers absent from his eyes. Letho stared down in contemplation after listening to the request. He tapped the table with his pudgy fingers while Roy was trying to link the matter to the monsters he knew. Letho gave his price. 200 crowns. It was double the reward he got for killing the grave hag in Caer. Obviously, the dwarf was loaded, and since different employers had different economic statuses, witchers were flexible with their pricings. Even though it was expensive, Seville Hoger agreed to it without batting an eye. Now, take us to your home. We need to investigate. As the main wine dealer of Aldersburg, Seville was a wealthy dwarf. His residence was in the western area, where the affluent lived, and it was surrounded by 4 tower houses. That area took up a major part of the city. The rich, famous, and powerful of Aldersburg lived there, like the Baron of Tavik, weapon and/or merchants, and wine merchants. The number of patrols and green infrastructure outnumbered that of the civilian area. Beyond the walls of the affluent area stood the gigantic Mahakam Mountains. Some bards teased that the mountains had been made by ancient nobles of Aldersburg to keep their troops from running away. Within the residence and outside its walls stood many dwarves with braided beards equipped with giant axes and hammers. They were sentries of the residence who kept the place and its residents safe. The guards bowed when they saw Seville, their eyes filled with respect. So this guy's a respectable one in the dwarven society, huh? Roy noticed that the outer walls were filled with patterns that resembled totems, but he couldn't make out what they meant. There were also carvings of Lebioda on some spots of the wall. Once they entered the house, Seville waved his men down, leaving them in peace. And he yawned. Just tell the guards when you finish checking the yard. They'll let you into the house for further investigation. I'm getting tired, so I'll be taking a nap. Seville suffered from sleep deprivation because of the nightmares, and he would take a nap whenever he had the time. Letho and Roy started with their investigation once Seville had left. Letho observed the yard structure. There was a small fountain in the center, and neatly trimmed, decorative plants surrounded them in an organized fashion. A large number of plants that were taller than a human were linked together, forming paths that turned into a small maze. Something sparkled within Letho's eyes, and he started searching in a direction. Roy knew that Letho had activated his Witcher senses, making him a radar that radiated microwaves. He went up to say, "I've always been curious about the way Witchers track down monsters." Letho was patient when it came to the Witcher trade. He explained, after Witchers go through their mutations, their senses become different from a normal human's. Precisely speaking, they can reconstruct everything they see, smell, and hear through their senses, turning them into a vague line of smell, ripples of sounds, or sets of footprints. Those can lead them to their prey. He paused for a moment. A Witcher's senses are sharp. They can see further, hear clearer, and smell things normal humans can't, like the stench of blood that should have been long gone, the smell of monsters, and the scent of a strong perfume. And also the smell of wine in cellars, he added. If we just track while using those traces, eventually we'll reach the culprit, Letho continued, then he put on a solemn look. But before you start doing that with your bounty after locating a suspicious trace, it'd be best you judge what kind of enemy you're going to face, whether it's something you can handle or something you can only hide from. If you make the wrong judgment, you might get yourself killed from facing off against a terrible monster. Melancholy welled up within his eyes, as if he'd remembered something sad. Whether you get it right or not depends on your experience. For example, drowners emit the smell of seaweed and the stench of fish, while ghouls will appear where there's the smell of rotten corpses. You'll see a hole in the ground with green fluids at the entrance where a pale widow burrows. And as for griffins, well, they only appear on mountains. Letho explained everything in detail patiently, while Roy listened, felt, and memorized it. Now that I've told you about the monsters, can you give me your judgment based on my teachings and the clues in the yard, boy? Letho had given him a test all of a sudden. Roy rubbed his chin and went through the details of the monsters Letho told him about. If it's just within this yard, he hesitated. We didn't see any weird footprints, so we can eliminate vampires who can turn invisible and hypnotize their prey. Katakan's not what we're looking for. You have a decent memory, Letho said, praising him for the first time in a while. Alright, since Katakan's not on the list, we'll have to go inside to search for more clues. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. https://discord.gg/reaperscans. Chapter 23. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 23. Secret of the Cellar, TL. Asuka, PR, Ash, Letho and Roy stepped over the bearskin rug, entering the great hall that glowed in resplendence under the candles. Meters away from them stood polished armor that gleamed under the light. The great hall was also lined with pastel-colored vases and china ornaments. A dozen expensive oil paintings hung on the walls, most of them portraits of other people. When Roy looked around, he realized one of the paintings depicted the Emperor of Nilfgaard, Imhir var Emreus, who took out the usurper years ago. Didn't expect him to hang an oil painting of the enemy's king in Edirn, Roy said. Seville knows how to butter people up. The dwarves have power. As long as he doesn't try to start a coup, the army can't do anything to him. And it's normal for dwarves to like him here. At least he doesn't discriminate against non-human races. I don't think so, Roy shook his head. The Emperor of Nilfgaard is just using the non-human races, he mumbled almost inaudibly. Witchers and Scoia'taels alike will be the victims of Imhir's conquest of the north. But now that I'm here, I'm not letting the Viper School become Imhir's tool. They left the topic there and went ahead. Two servants were watering the plants in the vase beside the staircase leading to the second floor. Roy's eyes widened when he saw who they were. He wanted to laugh, but he held it in. The servants were dwarves. They wore skirts and were stout, and they had beards as thick as a grown man's, but they were female. Respect the different races' customs, Letho whispered. He took out a satchel of white powder from his alchemy bag and spread it everywhere in the residence. At the same time, he explained, this is dried black hellebore powder. It's a nice scent for humans, but pungent for some creatures. You have a clue about what the culprit is? Roy asked, but Letho didn't answer. Roy went with him around the great hall, then the guest room on the second floor, and Seville's bedroom on the third floor. The dwarf was napping there. The Witcher and Roy searched everywhere they went. Did you find something? The dwarf, who was roused by the commotion, rubbed his eyes and yawned. When he took a whiff of the black hellebore scent in the air, Seville calmed, and the frustration that had haunted him was gone. Not at the moment, Letho answered. Do you have any secret chambers here aside from the third floor's room? Seville frowned, but he kept quiet. This concerns the culprit's capture, Roy said sternly. You must tell me, or I might fail to capture the creature. No refunds. Seville rubbed his braided beard intensely. A long while later, he sighed. Very well then. I trust the Viper School's reputation. I wasn't going to refuse, but I needed time to think. This is important. There's a trapdoor beside the kitchen cabinet on the first floor. It leads to the cellar. Be careful when you investigate. Do not destroy my wine barrels. He evaded their gazes, and when Seville came out from his bedroom, he held a key close to himself. I'll be going with you. No. Give me the key. All you remember is that we're still searching your residence. Go back to sleep for an hour and forget everything that happened, Letho said hypnotically, and he drew a sign in front of the dwarf. Seville's eyes quickly lost focus, and he dumbly handed the key over to Letho. A moment later, he closed the bedroom's door, and a loud snore came from inside. Roy looked surprised. You hypnotized him. He lied to me, Letho answered calmly. Sometimes you have to adapt to find the truth. Since they had Seville's orders and key, they went into the kitchen without a hitch and found their way down to the cellar. Despite it being a cellar, it was actually bigger than the house upstairs. Roy estimated that it was as big as the whole residence combined. Sconces lined one side of the wall, lighting up every corner of the cellar. The only thing in the room was wine. Barrels and barrels of it. There were 2 barrels on the ground, 2 on the rack, making them 4 barrels a group. They had signs hanging on them, showing the year and type of wine. Roy was fascinated, and he looked around. Grape wine from the year 1259. Honey wine from the year 1258. Nutty wine from the year 1257. The barrels in front were the younger ones. The further inside the barrel, the older the wine was. Fiorano from the year 1200. Ervelus from the year 1158. Seville couldn't have stored all the wine made by dwarves in here, could he? There's even wine that's 100 years old. Pity I don't like wine. Letho smacked Roy's shoulder, and Roy winced in pain. You'll know the beauty of wine once you become a man, he lectured. I have no plans on becoming a drunkard. One walk around the cellar would have taken them more than half an hour, but 10 minutes later, Letho stopped in his tracks when he passed a barrel of dwarven liquor from the year 1198. His nose wiggled like a hunting dog's, and he rooted himself into his spot. Then he caressed the barrel and knocked on it. Roy heard nothing aside from the knocking sounds, but he smelled something. That smell, Roy blurted out. His high perception lent him a keen sense of smell. There was a rotten stench lingering near the barrels of wine they were examining. It was faint, but it was there. Letho glanced at him in surprise. Not everyone could have smelled that. Roy knew the smell belonged to a corpse, but Letho knew what kind of species the corpse belonged to. Yes, this is the smell of a corpse, but the corpse of a human. The 50-year-old dwarven liquor managed to cover most of the smell, but it can't fool a witcher. Roy's heart skipped a beat. You're saying there's a corpse in there? He pointed at the barrel. Letho nodded, his bushy eyebrow arched. So that's why he wanted to follow us. He didn't want us to find out his little secret. I thought this was a little prank from a godling when I came here, but now I don't think so. It's more complex than that. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. https://discord.gg/reaperscans. Chapter 24. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 24. Wheedling and Pamphlet, TL. Asuka, PR, Ash, who does the corpse in the barrel belong to? Roy brushed the cool barrel in confusion, wanting to open it up to get his answer. Hiding a corpse in the cellar is dangerous for Seville. If he wants someone gone, he could have gone 100 other ways. There's no need for him to hide a corpse in the cellar. Letho kept quiet for a moment. Maybe the corpse is related to the nightmare that's haunting him, or maybe it's an unrelated secret. A secret he wants nobody to know. Should we open it then? Roy clenched his fists, raring to go. Unauthorized actions will anger Seville. Not even Axii could wipe that memory from his and his servant's mind. No need to go that far for 200 crowns. Keep your curiosity in check. Pretend we never came to the cellar. I'll try to wheedle something out of him later. Do as I say. After they left the cellar, Letho went back to the third floor's bedroom and asked Seville to hide the key again. Roy was looking forward to when he would master Axii. It had helped him multiple times. If the target wasn't on guard, Axii would always take effect. Axii's a more handy sign than the others. It's one skill I must have if I want to get anything I want. Seville had no recollection of the events from before he was hypnotized after he woke up. Instead, he looked less lethargic and more refreshed. I slept for an hour. He looked at the clock. It's been a while since I slept so soundly. His eyes widened in delight, and he waved his fists. That thing must be staying away now that you're here, Witcher. Have you found anything today? The dwarf waited for the answer in excitement, but Letho stayed calm. The creature's a cunning one, and it hides itself well. I'd like to know more if possible. Can you tell us about your nightmare, Mr. Seville? The color drained from Seville's face, as if he'd recalled something horrifying. The usually jolly dwarf looked hesitant. He was reluctant to talk about the nightmare in detail. My nightmare is terrifyingly bizarre. I can't explain it. Not even a witcher can help if you refuse to tell the truth. I'm sorry, but I just don't want to talk about it. My nightmare has nothing to do with the monster's capture, does it? Letho gave Roy a look, and he understood it was his time to talk. On the contrary, it's important for the monster's capture. Have you heard about a type of monster called HYM? Seville shook his head, and Roy started describing. HYMs are monsters from the conjunction of the spheres. They have no corporeal body, so the only way for them to survive is to live within someone else. Like a parasite. The little color left on Seville's face drained, and his fists clenched. Roy nodded. It's very particular about its target. HYMs usually live within the bodies of those who have sinned, or they might take over animals. A HYM absorbs its host's fear, regret, shame, and every negative emotion to construct a nightmare based on its host's true experiences. It will evoke the host's negative emotions, corrupting their mind and eventually destroying it. At that point, Seville's beard was trembling along with his lips. Oh Lebioda. I'm haunted by a formless demon. How did this happen? Don't worry. Roy got into character. Listen to me. Only the host can hear a HYM's murmurs. It attacks its host's mind through illusions and nightmares, taking the host's life force away. They always end up having poor sleep because they're haunted by nightmares. The nightmares will only become more frequent and more realistic. They will never stop, unless the host loses their mind, goes insane, or commits suicide. The last sentence finally broke Seville. He gripped Letho's right hand tightly, his face as white as a tombstone. It was marked with uncontrollable fear. Letho, this demon, this HYM, it must be the one tormenting me. You must get rid of it for me. Letho remained inscrutable, while Roy continued. There's a condition for that. The demon is a troublesome one. Normal attacks won't work on it. We must lure it out using your fears, and only then can a witcher like Letho kill it. That's why you have to tell us what's haunting you. You have to tell us the sin you've committed. Seville closed his eyes in agony. Sorry, but I have to think about it. The mention of the nightmare made him snap out of his fear. He started getting suspicious of the pair, worried that they might find out about his secret. It's getting late. I'll ask the servants to prepare dinner. We'll talk about this when you come tomorrow. Letho and Roy felt slightly defeated since they didn't learn anything about Seville's nightmare. But they didn't force Seville to talk more. You should have cast Axii on him again, Letho. Forced something out of him. It's not as simple as you think. If I cast Axii on the same target 3 times over a short span of time, it could be ineffective against him. And now that he has his guard up, Axii has a higher chance of failure. Letho shook his head when he noticed Roy's look of disappointment. Patience, boy. A smart hunter always waits for the perfect chance to deliver the fatal strike on their prey. That's how satisfaction comes by. Witchers didn't risk their lives solving requests just for the money. They were also looking for satisfaction upon the request's completion. Calling the meal they'd received that night dinner was an understatement. As if trying to apologize for his lack of cooperation, Seville had treated them to a feast. Everything under the sky was on that table that night, and the Mahakam produce added more color and flavor to the food. It was varied, incredible, and sumptuous. It was the best meal Roy had ever eaten since he'd crossed over to the Witcher world. Roy was still burping when he left the residence that night, and his frustration was mostly gone. The moon had risen, blessing the land with its silvery glow. Come to my room when we get back to the inn, boy. Why? To continue the tracking lesson. It was unfinished. This is the first request you're taking part in, so it's a good chance to follow up and learn more. The pair had exited the affluent area as they spoke, entering a dark, quiet alley. Suddenly, a man in a black cloak walked up to them. Half of his face was hidden by the darkness, but they could see it was a young, teen boy, with a scar the length of an index finger below his right eye. The tyranny of Tavik has plagued this land, innocent people of Aldersburg. He sounded fanatic and angry. The revolution shall prevail. He stuffed a pamphlet into Roy's hands before disappearing into the darkness, nowhere to be found. Roy came out of the tunnel so he could see the pamphlet more clearly. He asked the tipsy Letho to read it out for him. The great leader of the revolution, Vernon Ryan, has toiled for the rights of the people, but Baron Tavik, in all his cruelty, detained a leader of the people for 3 months. If there's an ounce of conscience in you, come to the plaza of Lebiota at 3 in the afternoon tomorrow to join the protest march. The pioneers of the revolution shall never die. Their flames of purity shall burn that fool of a baron to ashes. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. https://discord.gg/reaperscans. Chapter 25. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 25. The Secret of the Dwarf, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash, Witchers don't interfere with politics. Letho made the decision for Roy and tore the pamphlet apart. Roy wasn't planning on joining the march either. The revolutionists' robbery outside the city left a bad aftertaste in his mouth. No matter how much the revolutionists would fight against the army, the people would always be the victims. He could imagine how the army would capture the people of Aldersburg en masse during the protest march, and the wails of agony that would follow. When they arrived at the residence the next morning, Letho and Roy followed one of Seville's men inside. Seville had been waiting, and he waved away all his guards and servants when the pair came in. He stared down, biting his lip. His arms were crossed nervously as he paced back and forth. A while later, he let out a long sigh. Can you guarantee you won't tell a soul about it? Can you promise me that? Not a single person. No. Not even the ancient races can know about what I'm about to tell you, nor can any other living being. Seville looked up, his gaze pleading. Letho and Roy looked at each other. The dwarf's going to believe us without even a contract. Seville knew what they were thinking, and he answered, I have no choice. I can't take that monster's torture anymore. That HYM is going to kill me. His bloodshot eyes widened. Obviously, he hadn't rested well after Letho and Roy's departure. Besides, if promising me isn't enough, I can pay you. I believe everyone is interested in crowns. I'm doing all this so I can feel safe. He smiled bitterly. Letho arched his brow. As one of the Viper School's remaining members, his pride would never allow him to lie about a vow. Money can buy most people, but not a witcher. You didn't ask for a vow before we accepted the request. Unlike a promise, a vow is the power of fate, just like the law of surprise. And fate does not allow anyone to go against it. A witcher never makes a vow easily. Letho raised his index finger. You'll have to increase the reward. Seville's face twitched, but he was delighted. The more serious Letho was, the more credible, or at least that was what Seville thought. Roy snuck into the conversation at that point. He showed 5 fingers. 50 crowns for me. As for the witcher here, all you need to do is increase the reward by 100 crowns, and you'll have a Viper School witcher's promise. They had a deal. The bounty was raised from 200 crowns to 350, but it was affordable for the rich dwarf. On the name of the Viper School, Letho of Gulet promised to never reveal the secret Seville Hoger will be telling me today to any human, ancient race, or living being. If I break this promise, I shall never see the day the Viper School makes its return. The gods are my witnesses. On the name of Melitel, Roy promised to never reveal to anyone the secret Seville Hoger shall tell me today, or, Roy didn't believe in Lebioda or gods like Melitel, but he wasn't lying. He would take the secret with him to the grave. Half an hour later, Letho and Roy came into the 3rd floor's bedroom along with Seville. Letho lit a flame in the fireplace with Igni, and he did the same to 4 torches that were as tall as an average adult before placing them at the 4 corners of the bed. The bedroom was lit up, and no shadows could be seen. Please lie on the bed, Mr. Seville. The dwarf obliged. He covered himself nervously with his blanket. Letho said, It's only the 3 of us in this room. You can talk about your secret now. Talk about the nightmare that has been haunting you. Seville closed his eyes, his face contorted in pain, but he started telling his story. This is a story about my good friend, Ken. Ken comes from Redania. His father is a half-elf, while his mother is a human. Yes, he's part-elf, a being destined for greatness. He looks just like a human, but Ken is a wise man. He has a quote. Wine corrupts minds. Because of that, he never drinks alcohol. He has helped me greatly after coming to the Mahaka mountain range. Thanks to him, I grew from the insignificant nephew of Brovar Hoger to a famous individual. In the end, I managed to wrest the right to the wine business in Aldersburg from Zoltan Chivy and the other dwarves. Seville paused for a moment. I owe him a lot, and he's my best friend, but I know he'll never work under anyone for long. Once we came to Aldersburg, he found a new goal and left my team. Since he was a child, Ken has seen his father being tortured and discriminated against by humans because of his elven bloodline. His father has never enjoyed the same equal social status as humans, and because of that, he despises inequality and discrimination. Ken, ever so passionate, took action to go against that system. As you know, Witcher Etern's high taxation rate is one of the inequalities Ken saw, so he, in all his wisdom, gathered people who would fight against the system. Of course, he did it in secret. He didn't care about anyone's race or past. Anyone who had the passion for equality and rebellion were welcome in his team. They enjoyed free food and accommodation, though I sponsored a part of the expenses. The people of Eden might be born with a rebellious streak, and thanks to that, his team grew quickly, to the point where Baron Tavik had to pay importance to them. The advent of Ken's forces broke the balance of Aldersburg, which was made up of the Baron's troops, the people of Aldersburg, the Sparrow Triad, and the Mahakaman dwarves. The Baron, the moderate part of the balance, started negotiations with Ken. It went well in the beginning, and almost everyone was happy with the outcome. The taxes on peasants and merchants were lowered by 1/5. I told Ken he should stop when he was ahead, but he wasn't happy with the results. After a while of peace, he started pressuring the Baron again. A good man's fury can demolish the entirety of the Mahakam Mountains, that's what I always say. The Baron was infuriated by Ken's actions, and he issued a bounty on his head. Roy's eyes shone at that point. He could guess who that Ken character really was. He came to me to escape the troops' search. As his friend, I took him in, of course. I swear on Mahakam's name, I hid him in the place with the most cover in the residence. Roy and Letho showed no change in their expressions, as if they knew nothing of what was to come. The cellar contains too much wine for the troops to search. And I forbade them from opening the lid so my wine wouldn't get spoiled. Not desiring to cross the Mahakaman dwarves, the Baron didn't pursue the matter any further. Of course, they hadn't noticed that Ken was hiding in a barrel of 60-year-old dwarven liquor. Ken was safe. Very safe. Seville smiled bitterly. But I had forgotten one thing. Ken has never drunk even a drop of wine in his life. He's worse at drinking than a newborn. When I went back to the barrel he was in, he'd fainted from the scent of the liquor. Ken was lying in the liquor, his face red. He looked like he was sleeping, but no matter what I did, he wouldn't wake up. Seville paused. He died. Seville sat up and held Letho's beefy hands. He looked agitated, his heart threatening to burst forth from his chest. How ludicrous. Fate played a cruel joke on him. A wise man who'd never had any wine died in my wine cellar. I would dream of Ken every night. He'd demand to know why I killed him with my wine. I have let him down. Letho had an incredulous expression after learning about the whole matter from Seville. The guy had never had a drop of liquor for as long as he'd lived, but he'd died in a barrel of liquor. Ironic. I thought I'm a bastard. I deserve the nightmares. I know I've let him down, but I didn't kill him, the dwarf muttered unintelligibly as tears streaked down his face. He covered his face, bawling like a big child. Roy's lips twitched at the sight. All right. We get the situation now. Calm down, Mr. Seville. Come with us to the cellar. If what you say is true, then the cellar is the place you fear the most. If I'm right, the HYM will most likely show its true form there. Ha! See that can I not go? Seville hugged himself in fear. He was in a dilemma. Seville wanted to see the monster that had been haunting him for months, but he couldn't overcome his fear. Letho pretended to think about it for a moment. All right. You can wait for us outside the cellar. Here's the key. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. https://discord.gg/reaperscans. Chapter 26. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 26. The Acting Witcher, TL. Asuka, PR, Ash, Letho lit a few torches when they arrived at the cellar's staircase, illuminating Seville. Stay here with Mr. Seville, Roy. I'll go in and kill that monster. Letho gazed at Seville, his eyes gleaming. Keep quiet and try not to feel any fear, or the HYM will grow stronger by absorbing it. It'll take more work to kill it then. Seville froze after getting this order. He would have even stopped breathing if that were possible. You'll have to talk to him, Roy. Roy nodded, looking concerned. Seville Hogar's one bizarre dwarf. That corpse in the barrel is probably a big part of the reason for Seville's success. After Letho had disappeared into the wine cellar, Roy and Seville looked at each other, an eerie silence descending upon them. Let's play a game, Mr. Seville. Roy gave him a toothy grin. Let's play something good. How about a Gwent match? Money wasn't a problem for Seville, but it was for Roy. Seville put his index finger against his lips and turned away to look in the direction Letho left. He was uninterested by Roy's proposition. The more you're worried, the higher the chance the HYM will come to you. Besides, is there anything better than a Gwent match to pass the time in this kind of situation? The mention of the HYM made Seville lean against the wall by reflex. He had a look of surprise on his face when Roy pulled out 2 Gwent decks out of thin air. Roy still had that toothy grin on his face. Seville shook his head and declined the offer. Sorry, but I don't play Gwent. Roy didn't give up, even after the refusal. On the contrary, he kept trying to persuade Seville. The rules are simple. Once you master them, you'll find it's even better than wine. Seville's attention shifted, and he stopped craning his neck to look at where Letho went. Well, didn't expect someone as young as you to be a gambler, but you got one thing wrong. Aside from ores, wine is the best thing for us Mahakaman dwarves. Gwent is just a pastime for us. Take my advice and work with Letho. Once you make some money, open up a business, get a wife, and have some kids. Don't keep playing Gwent, or it'll bite you in the ass one day. Alright, fine. Roy shrugged and stopped trying to persuade Seville. What a shame. I wanted to see what the Scoia'tael deck looked like, he mumbled. What? Seville roared, and he shot up like a bristled lion. Roy swore Seville's bushy eyebrows were standing upright. Where did you hear about Scoia'tael? He was curious and panicked, the urge to know pushing his fear for the HYM away. Scoia'tael's the alliance against humans made up of non-human species, isn't it? Roy covered his mouth the moment he said that. Scoia'tael's movements were mostly underground before the First Northern War. They hadn't appeared in public yet, but Roy had let it slip. Seville's face scrunched up, his expression bizarre. A few years ago, an organization by that name lured a lot of the Mahakaman dwarves away with their extremely racist ideology. The neutral Mahakaman dwarves, led by Brovar Hogar, stand against them, but only the ancient races know about it. Naturally, it's normal for me to know about it, but how did you manage to find out about Scoia'tael? Roy was about to answer when an abrupt and big crash stopped him. There was inexplicable magic within the crash, and Seville was reminded of the moment a siege weapon crashed against a city gate. Even the cellar's ground trembled slightly. Roy and Seville were also shivering. That this is art. The HYM's going to die soon. Roy roared before leaving Seville for the barrels in the front, craning his neck to look inside the cellar. Seville's train of thought had been interrupted by the commotion the Ard sign had caused. He'd stopped asking Roy about how he knew about Scoia'tael, and instead looked inside nervously. Your tricks are useless against me, foul demon. A strong roar came from deep within the cellar, and Letho leaped over the wine barrel, agile as a cat. When he glanced at Roy and Seville, his face was filled with black, gnarly veins, and he looked like a creature from hell. Seville screamed, worry and horror showing up on his face. Is Letho's face hurt? Did the HYM curse him? Roy stared down and heaved a sigh. Don't worry, Mr. Seville. That's just the side effect of the Witcher's potion. That demon is no match for Letho. The moment he said that, sparks suddenly flew from the barrels that were covering Letho and the monster. The sparks moved gorgeously, like comets across the night sky, but the heat was contorting their surroundings, blurring the cellar. That's Igni. Letho's going all out. Roy gave Seville a look of reassurance, but Seville looked on in horror. Then he realized something, and the dwarf had a bitter look on his face. He requested, almost inaudibly, "Be careful, Letho. That's a barrel of 50-year-old dwarven liquor." Letho leaped through the cellar, but Roy and Seville could only see his shadow flying across the wall. He jumped everywhere, attacking the darkness again and again and again. Afterimages of his short sword lingered even after his attacks were done, and he moved like a viper, swift and deadly. And then they heard wails that could only come from a monster. It was shrill, bloodthirsty, and fierce. Every time the creature shrieked, Seville would tremble in fear. "It is done." Roy had judged that with certainty, and at the same time, a bizarre shadow appeared on the wall. It was a creature with limbs as gnarly as branches, its torso as tall as the cellar itself. It looked humanoid, but was trapezoid in shape, and countless twisted antlers protruded from its sides. Roy finally showed surprise, and he tried to recall the monsters that matched with the silhouette on the wall. Not even Ignis Fatui, which haunted the mists, dolls of water hags, woodland spirits, or less hens of the forest were as bizarre as the creature was. The monster looked incorporeal. Its body was shifting, contorting, and trembling, as if it were a leaf being blown by the wind. It had only been a few moments since the monster had appeared, but for Seville, it had felt like an eternity. The shadow roared at the witcher who was taking cover behind the wine barrel, and it trembled for one last time before melting like ice under the hot sun. After witnessing the monster's demise, Seville heaved a sigh of relief, and he stood up straight. A heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He looked cheerful, energetic even. "This is the end of it, then." He grinned toothily. A short while later, Letho's footsteps reached them, and the witcher came out from the darkness of the cellar. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. https://discord.gg/reaperscans. Chapter 27. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 27. Refusal, TL. Asuka, PR, Ash. Letho looked exhausted, his body covered with minor cuts. "The HYM is dead." He showed his hand to the dwarf, revealing a handful of grey powder that emanated a faint, unpleasant smell. When Roy recognized the familiar scent coming from the powder, he smiled. "I knew it," he thought. "Thank you, Letho." Seville took the handful of powder and squeezed it, venting his fear out on it. Tears welled up in his eyes as he could finally be at ease now. Letho was far stronger than he'd thought, and a chill ran down his spine when he recalled how intense the battle had been. But it worked out for the best. The monster that has haunted me for months is dead. I'm a free dwarf. He tossed the ashes into the air and took out a note from his pocket. "This is your reward." He handed it to Letho with gratitude. "You can exchange these for crowns in any Vivaldi, Giancardi, or Cianfanelli bank." Letho glanced at the amount written on the note before pocketing it. He knew where the dwarven banks were, they had branches in almost every city. "Witcher, Roy. Us dwarves have always supported the rebels from the shadows. It's to balance the forces in Aldersburg. Civilians and merchants alike can profit from it. If anyone were to find out that Vernon Ryan, the leader of the revolutionists, died in my wine cellar, the Mahakaman dwarves would be seen as the Baron's forces. The balance will be broken. That's why you must keep this a secret." "Of course," Letho answered. "I will not tarnish the name of the Viper School." "You have my word too," Roy chimed in. Then Seville gave them a deep bow. "I shall remember what you did for me today. From now on, you'll be my honored guests. My door is open for you anytime. But let's put formalities aside. It's getting late, so why don't I treat you to lunch? Thank you for your generosity, Mr. Seville, but this is just business. Since you've paid us, you owe us nothing anymore." Letho hadn't taken the compliment. Though, we wouldn't mind a meal. Seville left them for a while after they'd returned to the Great Hall. Roy looked at Letho curiously, as if surprised Letho would lie. Letho didn't do anything at first, but he was angered when Roy wouldn't take his eyes off him. "Is there really a demon in the cellar?" Roy whispered. Letho's reply was a look of surprise. "What do you think? Those weren't the remains of a HYM. They were wyvern feces, weren't they? I'd smelled that for nights. That must have been what that was." Roy was fairly certain that the ashes of the HYM Letho gave Seville was the same thing he used to chase wild animals away when they were camping in the wilds, wyvern feces. "Since he wants to get rid of a demon, I created one for him and killed it. Gives him peace of mind, and I hold up my end of the deal. He'll never be at peace if we never kill the demon." Letho paused. "You'll get it when you're older. Sometimes, the darkness within someone's heart is more terrifying than the monsters we hunt. Now that we've completed the request, Seville can at least sleep well." Letho looked up at the illuminated ceiling as he lamented the dwarf's experience. "Can Seville really sleep after we got rid of that imaginary HYM for him?" Roy had his misgivings. But Letho's the experienced one here. He has better judgment than I do. "I have another question. How did you make that HYM shadow?" I was almost fooled. After hearing the question, Letho extended his hands out quietly, his calloused fingers entwining together, and they danced like a butterfly before the candlelight. "Letho, you can start a career at the theater whenever you retire from being a witcher." Seville, Letho, and Roy were having lunch in the Great Hall. After the threat had been eliminated, Seville finally became more talkative, though he only spoke of his experience in Mahakam and the interesting things there. The dwarves' homeland stayed neutral no matter how serious the northern wars became. Because of that, they managed to survive for a long period of time. No matter if it was Eden in the east, Temeria in the north, or Nilfgaard in the south, none managed to conquer the Mahakaman dwarves. Aside from wine, Mahakam had their ore. More than half of the ore, foundries, and forges were in Mahakam. They had countless master blacksmiths who produced the best steel and weapons in the north. Any nation who would dare challenge the autonomy of the dwarves would incur their wrath. That nation would never get any weapons or equipment from Mahakam. That fact alone ensured their prosperity. On a side note, dwarves couldn't reproduce as fast as humans did, and they would only mature at 50.5. Since they weren't enough to conquer, they were fine living in Mahakam. Dwarves had the best lives amongst non-human races, at least in that era. However, there were also those who'd left their homeland or joined the underground group of Scoia'tael. They'd gotten involved in robberies or worked as bankers, traders, or blacksmiths in human settlements. Even though their own brethren looked down on them, their talents at least provided a good life for them. There was a hint of pride and envy in Seville's voice at that point. As the dealer for wine, he had far less clout than weapon or ore dealers. Seville hadn't stopped talking once he'd gotten into the mood. He would occasionally ask Letho about his life and praise him in an attempt to leave a good impression. It was a good lunch. "I point my weapons at my enemies, but I toast my friends. Have another drink with me, my friends." After their meal, Seville came up to them and pretended to hesitate. "I have one other request. You can't be thinking about us disposing of that corpse for you, can you?" Roy said jokingly. But Seville's eyes lit up. "I expected nothing less from Letho's assistant. That is what I have in mind." "What?" "Dispose of the rebel leader's corpse." Roy shook his head incessantly without even thinking. "Just because we shared a meal doesn't mean we have to risk our lives for you. I heard that the revolutionists are going to have a protest march this afternoon. They're going to force the Baron to release the guy who died in your barrel," Roy said. "Doing this at this point is suicide." Seville didn't give up. He looked at Letho pleadingly, but Letho shrugged after just one moment. Sorry, but that isn't what we Witchers are great at. Can't make that money, I'm afraid. You can ask someone else for that. Besides, you're powerful enough to find a way to get rid of the corpse. We won't be interfering. Seville caressed his beard, looking vexed. Even though the Baron's army has searched my residence, they might come again. Honestly, the Baron's listed me as someone to be kept under surveillance. His eyes will be on me the moment I leave my residence, and I don't want anyone else to find out about this secret. I can't trust anyone but you two. If it's really that hard, why don't you just find a spot to burn the corpse? Roy suggested. Seville shook his head. He died because of my oversight. If I defile my friend's remains, I'll never find peace. I want to make it up to him by giving him back to the revolutionists. But you can't let them know I'm related to this. No, Letho said, refusing him firmly. Sending their leader's body back to them isn't an act of charity, it's an insult. Even if we ignore the dangers along the way, and the revolutionists who can show up whenever they want, how are we supposed to get away once we make the delivery? The dwarf stared down in humility, then looked at them expectantly. His gaze sent a chill down Roy's spine, but Roy brainstormed and came up with a plan. Let me think about it. How big is the barrel that contains the corpse? Seville told Roy the measurements. He'd known his wine cellar for decades. Seville knew every barrel's measurement by heart. Do you have any ideas, Roy? Even Letho can't find a way around it. Can this plain, young man do it? Roy pondered about it in silence. Thanks to his knowledge of maths from his past life, he managed to calculate the barrel's size. It could fit in his inventory space, albeit barely. However, he wasn't sure if it was fine to intervene, so he glanced at Letho, and the Witcher shook his head. Sorry, Mr. Seville. I can't do it. Seville was crestfallen. Very well, then. I won't impose myself further. But if you have a change of heart, you're welcome here anytime. If you can help me with this matter, you shall be my sworn friends for life. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. https://discord.gg/reaperscans. Chapter 28. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 28. Temporary Separation, TL. Asuka, PR, Ash, I know you're a smart boy, and you wanted to help Seville settle his problem, Letho told Roy after leaving the dwarf's residence. But listen to me this time, and stay out of it. Witchers should always stay neutral in political fights. This is our principle, and our way of survival. Roy thought Letho looked funny as he lectured him in earnest, for he and the Ox brothers would break that principle in the future by assassinating the kings of the northern kingdoms, completing the hardest political power play. A perfect example of what not to do. Even though Letho was holding to his principle at the moment, Roy didn't think that was a good thing. Maybe staying neutral is the reason why Witchers go into decline. Nobody can stay away from trouble when chaos is brewing. If Roy could pass the trial of the grasses, he thought he'd try his best to change the school. Get them to go along with the times. The afternoon sunlight shone onto the land, but none of its warmth reached them. Letho and Roy went past Plaza of Lebiota on the way to Wall's Inn, and a shrill wail made them stop. If the pamphlet the Caped Man had spread last night was true, those who wanted to rebel would be attending the march at the plaza at the moment. However, Roy didn't see the sea of people he'd expected, but instead saw the state of chaos, where rubbish was strewn everywhere, just like how tourist spots in his past life looked every time tourists left. And there was a wailing woman there. She was unkempt, in torn clothes, and stared dumbly at the sky, her face streaked with ruined makeup, and she was scarlet from her cries. She looked pitiful, and yet, inexplicably funny. The woman was sitting on the ground, mumbling like a madwoman as she patted the shoulder of the man laying on her legs. The people who saw them gossiped about what had happened. There were those who pitied the woman and the man, but also those who laughed at them. How could the soldiers do that? The man's head was smashed in by their shields. His skull must have been crushed. He was just asking for it when he joined the parade to go against the Baron. Everyone else scurried off quickly, but that oaf just wouldn't run. I didn't expect an honest person like him to be a revolutionist. Can you keep quiet? He'd been nice to everyone when he'd been alive. Also, we wouldn't be paying lower taxes if not for the rebels. Respect the dead, you lot. That poor woman. She lost her husband, and they have no children. How is she supposed to survive? Roy stared at the face of the unmoving man, for he had no courage to look at the woman who was in despair. Such a shame. He's nothing but the revolutionists' cannon fodder. I wonder who'll take his widow in. Letho was as inscrutable as ever. Set your pity aside. Haven't you seen enough corpses outside the city? Politics have nothing to do with us. Let's go. I have something to tell you in the inn. After they had left the plaza, a man with a cart came up to the woman and took the corpse away as she wailed. Once they came back to the inn, Letho placed a satchel of crowns onto the table. Couldn't have done it without your help. As per the Witcher's rule, you get a share of the reward. 50 crowns, and not one less. You're splitting the reward again. Roy was surprised by the split, since Letho was the heavyweight in the whole request. Roy was just a minor character. You can keep it. We don't have to be this meticulous. Letho had been the one paying their expenses ever since Roy had started following him. The boy didn't pay even a single crown. After taking the money from the dead rebels and winning 30 crowns from the Gwent matches at the inn, Roy had 120 crowns at hand. That could last him a while. I told you that was the rule. It concerns my principles. Letho stared at him, unblinking. Also, I'm officially telling you that you're going to pay for your expenses yourself starting from tomorrow. I'm not going to pay a single crown. You have to be joking. Roy's face stiffened. No wonder he's splitting the money. So this is what he has in mind. But why though? Why are you leaving me to my own devices after taking me to Aldersburg? What's the meaning of this? Letho wasn't angered by the questioning. We'll have to prepare the potions and the necessities for the trial of the grasses for you. That's going to cost a lot. We still need a few rare ingredients and mutagens too, he said. Can you not feel it? Your training is different from what the Viper School teaches. Letho gesticulated clumsily. If we continue with our traditions, you'll be well fed and sheltered, but you'll also be locked in Gorthugvade and trained for years. You'll never enjoy anything there. Ox, Seret, and I think that being in this kind of state weakens the trainees' will to live. The 100% failure rate of the trial of the grasses over the past 20 years relates to this. It's time to change if we don't want the Viper School to disappear. The old Witchers usually only start taking requests after they finish school. But now, it's also a part of the test. Only by supporting yourself can you know how hard it is to make money. That's the only way you'll treasure it. And only by forming a deep bond with the material world can you stare death down in the trial, Letho concluded. Roy kept quiet. He thought what Letho had said was sophism, but he had a point. One of the training methods involved locking the disciple up, while another let them do whatever they wanted. Letho went for the second one, though Roy had some objections. If we spend all our time working, how are we supposed to train? Well, you seem to have well handled it along the way. Letho patted his shoulder. I trust you can find the balance, boy. Don't forget what you learned. It'll help you survive. Is this a challenge? If you think it is. Or it can be a test, if you wish. Roy relented. He'd been angered in the beginning, but excitement welled up within him after he'd calmed down. Can I survive in a big city like Aldersburg with my own skills? Are you leaving me? Roy asked. He noticed the hints in Letho's explanation. Don't worry, Letho answered. Just a temporary separation. I have to get an ingredient for your preparatory potion, and it's in a dangerous spot. Going solo makes it easier for me, so take this chance to explore. Once I get back, the only time you'll be alone is after you pass the trial. Roy smiled bitterly. In other words, I'm left behind because I'm too weak, and I would have been a burden. What's this preparatory potion you talked about? It's a potion with a lower toxicity level. It'll help you adapt to the decoction of the grasses. You'll need it, since it can gradually increase one's resistance to poison. Can't just take the decoction of the grasses right away. It's too poisonous. All the trainees would die. Roy could understand why Letho wanted to go alone. How long will you be gone? Will I be learning anything else? About a month or two. Give me a moment. Letho took out a black leather note from the horse's saddlebag. You know a lot of herbs now, so it's time to start potion making. There are more than a dozen recipes here, and the note has some common monster traits written in it. Should be enough to last you a while. Humans use normal potions, while witchers use potions and decoctions brewed with magic. This is going to be your basic alchemy training. That's all I have to say, boy. Time is of the essence. He patted Roy's shoulder. You're a disciplined one. Don't disappoint me. Wait. Do you still have that dragon's dream you used against those drowners? Roy had to get something to protect himself after Letho's departure. PR/N. For those who don't remember, Dragon's Dream is a kind of alchemy bomb infused with flammable gas. Letho thought about it before handing a green, glass canister to him. You don't know how to cast Igni, so Dragon's Dream won't be of any use. Dancing Star's a better choice. Once this canister is smashed, a circle of fire with a 10-feet radius will appear. Even if it's underwater, the effect's going to last for a long time. Letho warned, be careful when you use this. It's the last one in stock. The materials alone cost 100 crowns. Keep this as your trump card, and don't use it unless absolutely necessary. I understand, Roy answered. And how am I supposed to know when you're back? I can find you as long as you're still in the city. Letho left without another word, and a short while later, he was but a little speck in Roy's eyes. Roy kept Dancing Star in his inventory space, feeling safer with it around. When he opened the old, ancient, leather notebook, the words inside jumbled up and floated around him, giving him a headache. He realized one big miscalculation. I probably only know about 100 words in common speech, and that's including my parents' names and the herbs Letho taught me. How am I supposed to learn this on my own? Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. https://discord.gg/reaperscans. Chapter 29. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 29. Outside the city, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash, Roy made some calculations. A room in an inn wasn't something a civilian could afford in a city like Aldersburg. Food and accommodation alone would cost 7 crowns a day. If Letho were to be absent for a month and a half, Roy would be spending more than 200 crowns. That was more money than he had on him. And that was excluding other expenses, like lessons for common speech. He was planning on getting a class for that during Letho's absence. Forever being illiterate wasn't on his agenda since it would hinder him in his future career. Knowledge and books came at a steep price, especially in cities like Aldersburg. Learning is going to be expensive here. Roy checked out of the expensive room and detailed his plan out in his mind. First, he'd have to rent a cheap spot, ideally one that would cost 1 crown a day. He'd need a big, hidden space nearby to sustain his daily training. Roy wasn't going to ask Seville for help, for he'd just refused the dwarf's request. Asking him for help right away would be a weakness on Roy's side. After that, he'd have to get a job that could make him some quick money. He couldn't just spend and not earn. Roy had to be prepared for Letho's long-term absence. And finally, he'd need a reliable teacher whom he could learn common speech from. I'll try to haggle with them about the pay. Roy spent the whole afternoon asking 5 landlords about their rooms for rent. Most landlords tried to take advantage of him because he was young and an outsider. The cheapest room cost more than 3 crowns per day, and that was excluding meals. That made Roy realize that finding a cheap, suitable room in the city was unrealistic, so he went to the city gates and asked people around there. To his surprise, he managed to find a spot before sundown. Behind the southern gate of Aldersburg, Roy was led through a wheat field that gleamed golden by a man in his 30s. The man was gaunt and stubbled. He was wearing a white shirt, a pair of white pants, and a beanie of the same color. Eventually, they came to a piece of land that housed a gigantic watermill and a few houses. The man was Hank, the owner of the watermill. It was nearly sundown when they arrived. The setting sun sprinkled golden dust on the 4 houses sitting near the watermill. The smell of wheat wafted through the air as the autumn breeze blew across the fields, the fallen leaves dancing in the air. As the watermill was slowly running its course, water flowed across it. If Roy could stop time, the scene beside the river would have looked like an oil painting. Roy took in the scenery as he followed Hank around. When his gaze fell on the coop on the right side of the watermill, Roy looked closer. He saw a young lady in a white apron with her back facing them. Her brown hair was tied in a ponytail, and she was bending over to feed the chickens with the feed from her dustpan. She was petite in stature. But that wasn't the point. The point was the young lady's back was protruded. She's a hunchback. When Hank noticed where Roy was looking, he smiled awkwardly. My daughter is very ill, my friend. That's why she's in that state. Did she scare you? I'll chase her away right now. Because of his ugly daughter, nobody would rent Hank's empty room no matter how low the price was. Now that this idiot's here, I'm not going to let him go that easily. This boy is going to be easy to negotiate with. No, Roy shook his head. He wasn't someone who would laugh at the disabilities of others. I don't mind her. Just take me to the room. The girl in the chicken coop heard their conversation, and she turned around. When she saw Roy and her father, the girl stumbled to hide in the storehouse. The way she ran was awkward. Her legs were of unequal lengths, and her shoulders weren't leveled. Whenever she tried to walk, she would sway and limp. Roy was reminded of a limping, old woman when he saw the girl running away. The room Hank was renting to him was plain and simple. There was nothing but a bed made out of hay and a blanket. The room was clean, though shabby when compared to the inn rooms that were decked out in feather blankets, delicate furniture, French windows, and full-body mirrors. Roy didn't complain though. After surviving in the wilds with Letho, he didn't mind what bed he had. Ever since he came to this world, he'd led an extreme, minimalist lifestyle. Fortunately, the original Roy wasn't a delicate young man, and thanks to that, the new Roy adapted to life quickly. If I was living like in my old life, I'd probably have to be a noble or a mage. Roy was happy with the place, though. There was a big plot of land beside the pond the watermill was built on. He could use that place to train his crossbow shooting. Hank even threw in free dinner, so Roy paid him 30 crowns to stay for the month. When night fell, Roy came to the dining table. There, he saw Hank and his family. Aside from the gaunt owner of the water mill, there was a fat, pudgy woman wearing a gaudy, long dress and disgustingly crimson lipstick who was sitting beside Hank. Let me introduce you to my wife, Roy. This is Manna. She helps out at the mill. The fat woman was all smiles. Ah, I was wondering why the birds were chirping so happily this morning. So, we have a guest. You have good taste, my friend. I guarantee there's no other place that's as cheap and clean as ours around here. Have a nice stay. You'll love it. The fat woman covered her mouth and giggled hoarsely, her meaty body trembling along. Roy glanced at Hank. With a wife like her, it's little wonder he's so gaunt. You don't look like a local, and your accent sounds unfamiliar. Where do you come from? Are you here for urgent business? Mana took a pig trotter that was grilled golden brown and licked the fat off her fingers greedily. I come from a village in Lower Posada. A relative of mine took me here to work, said I could gain some experience. But he disappeared the moment we arrived in the city. Roy sighed on purpose and took a pig trotter to chomp on. Oh, what a horrendous relative. The fat woman wiped her oily mouth with a napkin, sympathy flashing in her eyes. Don't worry, my friend. Aldersburg is a big city. If you're willing to work for it, jobs are everywhere to be found. You'll find one quickly. Roy looked at the couple. Do you have any jobs you can recommend? Hank shook his head as he pondered, the light making shadows dance across his face. The butcher across. No. He won't teach an outsider that trade. It's too lucrative. The executioner's assistant. No. Too much death. It's bad luck for the mill. Take my advice, young man. Since this is your first job in a big city, why don't you lower your standards? The fat women chimed in. Hank left his home to work here when he was your age. He had to work for 10 years to make some money and rent this mill. He'd done every job under the sun before that, hogwash disposal, and even just being a stand-in for a booth owner. I think you should try those jobs out. The market in the city center needs workers, but do look out for certain people though. Hank continued. Mana's right. If any revolutionist gives you pamphlets, remember to stay away from them and don't buy into their propaganda. Of all the things they can do, they decide to revolt. One of these days, their heads will be under the guillotine. I thought they were doing it to lower the taxes on peasants. Roy quietly finished all the pig trotters and licked his lips. Hank's dinner was great. The trotters were soft and delectable. These would be on par with Letho's grilled meat if they add some honey onto it. Only issue is the amount. Probably only the first day's dinner can be this good. Oh, you don't know. Of course. Baron Tavik has relented once, and honestly, they should have quit while they were ahead. But then their leader vanished into thin air, and they insisted on blaming the Baron for it, forcing him to answer to them. This is just ridiculous. Roy knew the leader's corpse was rotting in a certain dwarf's wine barrel. The Baron was wrongly accused in that case. Hank continued. You'll have to look out for the Sparrow Triad too, my friend. Rebels aren't the only danger in Aldersburg. Those bastards are evil. They do anything from scams to robberies. Don't go to the lower part of the city. That's Triad's turf. They target outsiders, especially young, frail, handsome boys like you. Hank smiled eerily. Some nobles love young boys. Thank you for the reminder. Roy nodded and filled his bowl with potato soup. Oh, right, Mr. Hank. I remember seeing a girl earlier. She's your daughter, isn't she? Why isn't she here with us? The air froze after Roy mentioned the girl. The fat woman who was chomping down on her food choked on it. She thumped her chest, face red from suffocation, and Hank put his fork down. She'll only ruin our appetite, my friend. Just enjoy your dinner. She has her own place. Humph! After the fat woman had calmed down, her jovial expression was replaced by a contorted one. Don't mention that wretch ever again. It's our business how we treat her. You stay out of it. The fat woman didn't bother to hide the disdain she held, though whether for Roy or the girl, that remained a mystery. We're kind enough to feed and shelter her. She can forget about dining with us. What's her name then? That wretch. Call her Toya. Roy went around the place after dinner, and saw a lonely girl sitting at the storehouse's doorstep, eating from her plate. He finally saw her face thanks to the sconce on the wall. The girl had a round face and petite features that matched her face's size. Her eyebrows were thin, her lips tiny. Her cheeks glowed red under the light, and if only by her looks, Roy would say she was around his age. Quite the young lady. The girl's perception was sharp. She realized Roy was there after just a moment, and she scurried away like a scared sheep. Am I really that scary? I'm not a demon, Roy thought. He went over to see what the girl was having. Compared to the sumptuous dinner Hank and Manna had, Toya only had a shabby plate of dull mashed potato. Roy wondered why Hank and his wife would torture their own daughter. Just because she's misshapen and unlikable. But Roy couldn't interfere, for he hadn't been there long. He had to familiarize himself with the place before he could do anything. The moon's silvery glow bathed the land. On the plot of land beside the pond stood a firm, gaunt boy with black hair and black eyes. He was kneeling on one knee, holding a crossbow with both his hands as he aimed at a gnarly tree 50 feet away. His body was centered, his shoulders leveled. His left knee was on the ground, his left foot leaning against the earth. His right knee was pointing outward as his right foot grounded him, forming a firm triangle with his left leg, supporting the boy. The boy placed his hip gently on his left heel, while his right elbow was placed on the right knee, supporting the hand crossbow that was held in his right hand. Roy took a deep breath as he aimed at the tree, and he let it out slowly. The moment it ended, he pulled the trigger with his left index finger. The arrow soared through the air, lodging itself into its target. Then Roy performed a series of actions with his hands and feet in succession, reloading his hand crossbow in 4 seconds. The boy dashed to the side and grounded himself again before changing into a standing position to shoot. He kept dashing, stopping, changing positions, shooting, and retrieving the arrows more than 500 times. 3 hours had passed after 500 shots, and his muscles were screaming in protest. Roy ended the boring shooting exercise, but he was panting. The night breeze cut through him with its chill, but it couldn't douse the flame within him. You unlocked a new skill. Unnamed Level 1. You have begun to master the usage of ranged weapons, crossbows and hand crossbows, after receiving a Witcher's lessons and shooting thousands of times. Whenever you're using ranged weapons, your accuracy, effective range, power, and piercing power will be increased by 5%. This can also be used as an active skill, doubling the increment of the effective range, but at the same time, your stamina consumption is also doubled, and your movement speed is halved. The effect lasts for at least 30 seconds. Roy heaved a long sigh, a smile carving itself on his sweat-drenched face. Finally, my training paid off. I finally got a weapon skill. Then Roy changed the name to Crossbow Mastery. Even though the increment for piercing power and damage was only 5%, it would become a 10% increase when Massacre's buff was included. Because he'd killed 3 peasant rebels, humans were included in Massacre's list of effective targets, making the skill one that could be used in many battles. If Roy activated Crossbow Mastery, he would be a powerhouse for a while on the battlefield. Roy was planning on getting a crossbow, for Gabriel the mini crossbow couldn't keep up with him anymore. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. https://discord.gg/reaperscans. Chapter 30. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Reaper Scans Chapter 30. Market and Bullying, TL. Osaka, PR, Ash. It was nearly 5 in the morning, but dawn hadn't broken past the horizon yet. When most people were still in their dreams, Aldersburg's market got lively. All of the most hard-working people in the city were toiling in the market. Manual laborers went through the streets delivering heavy packages, while vegetable and fruit sellers dragged their carts of merchandise along the way, hollering at the people in the market, trying to get someone to buy what they sold. Some booth owners were shivering from the cold morning wind, but they quickly stacked their merchandise on the racks. Young, bearded men were adding spices to their kebabs, the smoke from the charcoal wafting across the air, bringing the scent of food everywhere. Livestock merchants were pointing at their merchandise in the coop, haggling with their customers, who were getting red from the cold. Roy squeezed through a few crates of muddied, freshly plucked parsley and watercress before arriving at an herb booth. The booth owner was a man in his 40s. He was wearing one thick felt hat and a gray overcoat. His hands were hidden in his sleeves, but Roy knew the owner was rubbing them together. Wrinkles were strewn all over his face. He looked like an honest man, but his eyes had the cunning gleam of a businessman. "What would you like, my friend?" The owner looked at Roy's young, handsome face and rubbed his fingers together suggestively. "Something to treat hemorrhoids. PR/N, LMFAO. This old man is too much. Hemorrhoids. Why is he talking about that?" Roy was stupefied. "He can't be thinking that I was." Roy looked disgusted. "I'm not here for herbs. My name's Roy, and I just came to Aldersburg, so I'm here for a job. I heard the marketplace needs workers, so I came." "I see. Roy, huh?" The businessman nodded. He crossed his arms and gave Roy an observing look. "You don't look strong enough, so manual labor's off the list. Do you know how to count? How to read? Tell me about your strengths." "I can count, but I can't read." Roy looked at the merchandise on the rack and smiled after seeing all the herbs. "And I know herbs very well. For example, the oldest herb you got here is right in the center. It's a 5-year-old mandrake root. A great herb to treat rheumatism, pustules, and asthma." The merchant was surprised to hear that. He didn't expect the young boy to have such a good eye for herbs. "What about this one, then?" The merchant pointed to the herb at the mandrake root's left. It was a yellow, cone-shaped root. "That's wolfsbane." Roy blinked. 3 years old, around and about. "Treats." "Well, it can treat erectile dysfunction." The merchant asked him about all the herbs on the rack, and Roy had everything correct. "Wow, you know this is a beggar tick. Looks like you have experience." The booth owner extended his hand. "Roy, is it? Call me Tross. I've been running this booth for decades, and everyone knows me. My reputation's good, and so is the shop's. Why don't you work for me? You obviously don't sound like you come from Aldersburg. Everyone else here isn't that easy to get along with." Roy felt relieved. "Can you go into the details? The job scope and pay, for instance," he said calmly. "I'm already 40.3, my friend. I have to wake up at around 5 every morning just to run this booth. Every day, I restock and set up business despite the cold morning winds, but it's torturous. I might die from overworking before 50, so I'm looking for someone to help me for the time being. It's best if they're familiar with herbs and know how to count. Bonus if they have a good memory." Tross continued. "You'll only have to stay here from 4 to 8 in the morning, then I'll take over. If nothing goes wrong, I'll pay you 5 crowns a week." Waking up at 4 was easy for Roy. He only needed 5 hours of rest after replacing sleep with meditation, but the pay was a problem. 5 crowns a week only amounted to 20 a month. It wasn't even enough to pay rent in the city outskirts. "You're trying to trick me, aren't you, Mr. Tross? Just because I'm a young outsider." Roy pursed his lips. 10 crowns a week, and I can start working right away. You can't ask for that kind of pay, my friend. When I was your age, I couldn't even make that much in a month." Tross squinted, and he made another offer. "What about this? 7 crowns a week, and a meal to boot. You can take it from the grilled meat booth right beside us. I guarantee you won't find a better pay anywhere." Roy stared into his eyes, and when Tross was about to lose his patience, he nodded. "Then let's start today, Mr. Tross. Tell me what I should do. What's the market price for the herbs?" Roy spent the whole morning at the herb booth asking for the prices of each. They were constantly changing, so Tross recorded the latest prices on a piece of leather beside the rack for Roy's reference. He taught Roy the basics of weighing and things to look out for. Finally, he told Roy to come at 4 the next day before letting him go. Roy went around the marketplace again. Since his job at the herb booth would end at 8, he had a lot of time to spare, so he was going to find another job. The best one would be the butcher's apprentice. He'd make crowns and gain EXP, but just as Hank told him, Roy was in Aldersburg, not Kare. The city's butcher wasn't his relative, so there was no way he'd let an outsider have a cut. Obviously, he couldn't be a butcher, but there was another similar job that caught his attention: poultry selling. It was mostly helping the citizens kill their poultry. They only gave him 1 EXP per kill, but at least there were a lot of them. The poultry seller's booth was right beside the coop. The owner was Roer, an elderly local with gray hair. After Roy made his introduction and showed his skills in cutting up poultry by easily killing a whining goose, defeathering it, and cleaning its insides, Roer agreed to hire him. However, the pay was absurdly low. Roy would only get a crown for every 30 kills he made, but he could take on as much work as he wanted, and he could leave if he was exhausted. Roy didn't negotiate with him. He was doing it mainly for the EXP. If Roer was right, Roy would be dealing with 15 chickens, turkeys, or geese every morning. In EXP terms, that meant he would have 15 EXP in a morning. It was much better than what Roy got in Kare. That was one of the perks of big cities. They had more opportunities and more ways to gain EXP without risking his life. Roy heaved a sigh and put down his bloody knife before dusting the feathers off of him. He'd killed 20 geese that afternoon, gaining 20 EXP in bettering his massacre. More importantly, he could stand on his own 2 feet then. Even without Letho's help, he could live in the city by himself. After settling down at work, Roy would get a teacher to teach him common speech. On the outskirts of the city, a sheet of gold rained down, courtesy of the setting sun, and Roy came back to the watermill. The smell of dirt, grass, and falling leaves wafted over him, relieving him of the stench of feces. Roy smiled, feeling light. However, he stopped in his tracks when he was 100 feet away from the mill, looking somewhere afar. A group of children surrounded the haystack and firewood that were outside the rickety, wooden storehouse. They had unkind looks on their faces, one that was beyond their age, and they mocked a girl who was on the ground. "You're a camel wretch, you. Why'd you come out instead of staying in that warehouse? You ruined my appetite, do you know that?" A lanky, freckled boy poked at the child's head as he cursed her. "She's not a camel wretch. Camels are adorable." A cute girl with pigtails was holding a forked branch with her pudgy hands, and she jabbed it at the fallen child's protruding back. The child trembled from the jab, and she hugged her knees, her face nearly kissing the ground. "She's a monster. See this. There's poisonous water inside. She'll poison the food of anyone she hates. I bet that's how my grandma died, and I bet that's how her mother died. She's a witch. A wretch. That's what the books say. She curses someone every day, casting her wicked spells. We should get a witcher to deal with her. Only a mutant can deal with a wretch." The child who was bullied suddenly started to sob. "Did you just cry, you ugly wretch?" The freckled boy smacked the back of her head. "We're doing this for justice. Just like the revolutionists. You're the wretch who sides with the Baron. Get her." And then the children pulled her hair, kicked her back, jabbed it with branches, and some even flung pebbles and mud at her. "What are you doing, you little bastards? Stop right away." A faraway shout shocked the children who were bullying Toya. They glanced back and scrambled away without seeing who it was. A moment later, only the girl who was hugging her legs was left. Her clean white apron was soiled with footprints and mud, the neck under her brown hair littered with bruises. You're Toya, aren't you? Hank's daughter. How do you feel? Did the little bastards hurt you? Roy hunkered down beside her and extended a hand. The hunchback girl glanced at him, her gaze terrified and alert. There were a couple of slap marks on her face, looking like a ruined oil painting. She pushed herself up with her calloused hands that were filled with frostbite. Quietly, she limped into the warehouse, her back hunched like a hill, and she closed the door. Roy couldn't imagine how bad her life must have been for her to have that look on her face, but he thought he should do something for her. Roy took out the marigold from his inventory space and wrapped it with a piece of cloth before putting it at the doorstep. I left some herbs for you, Toya. Just chew it and rub it on your wound. It'll work well, trust me. When it was dinner time, Roy complained to Hank about what he'd seen. I saw some brats ganging up on Toya, pulling her hair and beating her with sticks. Her face is swollen. Don't you care about it? Oh, don't mind it, my friend. That girl can take a lot of hits. Those kids can't hurt her, and teaching her a lesson makes her work harder, Mana answered matter-of-factly, chomping down on the oily meat. Roy gasped. This woman's the stepmother. No doubt about it. I know you're kind, Roy, Hank chimed in. But we're just a normal family. We can't shelter Toya like a princess. Can't do anything about it, you know. With her looks, she's going to be treated like a freak no matter where she goes. Enduring that tiny bit of suffering is the only way she can live. It's been more than 10 years now she's been this way. That girl's grown strong. Tiny bit of suffering. Damn, these people don't see her as human. No wonder they won't even let her dine with them. What is Toya to them? Probably just free labor they can exploit and vent on. Let's not talk about her, my friend. You've been in the marketplace for a whole day. Did you find a job? Mana asked curiously. She was more interested in that matter than Toya's suffering. I did. The couple was delighted. Now that he has a job, he has money to keep on renting the room. Roy went to take a look at the storehouse after dinner. He heaved a sigh when the marigold was nowhere to be found, and when he came back to his room, Roy saw a fresh, clean apple on the barrel of water at the doorstep. Under it was the blue cloth he'd used to wrap the marigold. Is this a return gift? I think I might be able to communicate with her. Join our Discord to chat about the series and get notified when a new chapter gets released. https://discord.gg/reaperscans